So, welcome to another episode of Conveyancing Matters. And today we've got a very special guest, Rob Moore.
Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
So, hi, Rob. How you doing?
Hey Stuart, all good, thank you.
Good stuff. So, how do I introduce Rob Moore? So, do I call him an author, public speaker, entrepreneur, property investor, TV personality, boxer, sportsman? Where do I go here?
Entrepreneur, that's a catch-all term, isn't it? And it's vague enough to make me sound important.
So obviously, you've been in property for ages, and I come across you on your podcast and your social media platforms. Even got some of your books, so I'm not even sort of actually joking. I do actually subscribe to a lot of your theories about sort of investing and stuff like that. So maybe if we just start off with giving a brief bit of history about actually how you got into property in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So nearly 2 decades ago, I went to a property networking meeting locally in Peterborough. And networking back then wasn't really for me. I was a bit introverted, a bit of an artist. I didn't like yuppies or, businessy type events. Of course, my tune's completely changed on that now, and many people might call me a yuppie. I don't think I've said the term yuppie for about 10 years. I think you got to be 40 to know that phrase. And yeah, because I'd been struggling financially in my life and I got myself into debt, a sort of mentor at the time who was hanging my work because I used to be an artist, he was like, you should get into these property meetings because, you can get into property with no money down, and most people who are successful make money in property. And this was 2006/7, when everyone was making money in property. And if anyone's been in the property game for 20 years, you'll remember the same day remortgages and all these kind of things. And I knew nothing about this and didn't think it was possible. And then I went to this property meeting and I met my business partner Mark Homer there at the first one. And that kick-started our journey. And I got to know him and he gave me some books to read, and I managed to get a job at his property sourcing company. And then we bought 20 properties together in that first year and about another 30 the next year, evenings and weekends, while we were sourcing properties for other people in our day job.
Wow, blimey. So you did go sort of in at the deep end, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I suppose I didn't know what I didn't know back then, and I didn't know that was, I didn't have the limiting beliefs. Often people say, well, if I knew how hard business was, I wouldn't have got into it. I didn't really know what was normal and what wasn't. And I think it was a good job that I didn't know my business partner had money up front. And yeah, I guess I just didn't know. Although I didn't have knowledge of the industry, I also didn't know the limitations.
Mm. Yeah, there we go. So just as a general, why do you think it is such a good idea to still buy property? Because we now got cryptocurrency, we're more educated in what we can look into, but bricks and mortar is still such a big favourite for everybody to invest in.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a favourite for everyone. If you're in Eastern society, you don't have as good private property ownership rights. And a lot of the younger generation, they want the freedom to travel, and they're much more raised on the sort of the digital economy. So it's not for everyone because there are downsides to it. However, the upsides are it has great utility of most other asset classes other than maybe some food commodities. I don't know if you call them assets, but basically, you need property to live in, whereas many other asset classes don't go up in the same way because they don't have the same utility function. You can track about 1,000 years of history. So you can go back to 1088 and you can see that all land and property value in the UK was worth about £1 million, and now that won't buy a garage in central London. So you can see the growth curve there. I call it the financial triad, whereby you've got capital, equity, and income. Now, capital is the value of the asset, equity is the value you've added or the discount you've gained, and then income is the cash flow. And you get capital in gold, but you don't get equity because you have to buy it at the market price and you don't get income. But with real estate and property, you get capital, you get its value that goes up. You get equity because you can buy low, sell high, or you can add value through refurbishment or redevelopment, and you get income. So you've got the magic three there. Also, the banks will lend on property. That is their main security and collateral. They don't, lend generally on your watch portfolio or your stock market portfolio. Generally, it's on property. So I also found out recently, and I found this interesting, an economist told me this, but the banks don't want, we're tens of thousands of houses behind where we need to be to catch up with supply issues. Mm-hmm. So, we're 70,000-ish houses a year behind target for development to catch up with the housing crisis, basically, the accommodation crisis. And I learned recently that the banks don't want that to be caught up, because if it is caught up, then it will reduce the value of property and reduce their risk, because there's more supply than demand. So even the banks are controlling, the housing supply. And when you've got low supply and high demand, you've got rising prices.
Of course you have. Yeah, of course you have. Yeah. So, I suppose leading on from that, how do you see the market at the moment? Because, there is such a demand and, a general kind of thought on most things in life is, well, the demand is so high, it keeps prices high. So how do you sort of see the market at the moment and possibly the immediate future for it?
Yeah, the market at the moment, I'm sure it really fascinates me. I never pretend that I know when the market will, when the bubble will burst or when the market will rise and fall. I think nearly 2 cycles of experience does give me some insight. And I think the main reason that it's still a seller's market, because let me caveat this, Stuart. It depends where you are in the country, and it depends on the type of real estate you're buying, whether it's residential or commercial or industrial. So that's important. But yeah, the market is still quite buoyant and quite strong when I'd have expected it to already correct. But that's usually because of supply versus demand. And there's still not that many properties on the market for sale, which again surprises me. What we are seeing though is the rising interest rates, which are reducing the affordability, reducing basically people's mortgages are much more expensive now. So you're seeing that people's mortgages have gone up 100 or 150%. And so I think that's going to push some repossessions into the market because people won't be able to afford that. We had some strong rental increases in the last 24 months, which partly negated the cost of finance, the interest rate rises. But I think the lockdown created some artificial, basically lockdown ruined supply.
Yeah.
And so that created a false, when I say false, it is what it is, but it created a false bubble.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that by now that bubble would have burst. But I wonder if the supply of houses on the market has caught up yet. It probably hasn't. It's fascinating times because you've got rent rises, which is obviously good if you want to be an investor, but you've got a much higher cost of finance. So you've got to kind of offset that against each other. But I mean, we just bought a Pizza Express, and they were in a CVA, and the rent that they're paying is at least 25 grand under market value for rent. And I think there's quite a lot of that in the retail space where companies have struggled, so they're on old rents. And if you can bump the rents up, you can bump up the income. If you can, the increase in rents also increases the value of commercial property.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that probably came out a bit chaotic in the way it came out of my head, but there's hopefully it shows that there's quite a lot of factors to the market.
But we see a similar kind of thing. I think sort of it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing all the time. I mean, again, if you look at stats, as a business, if you actually took the COVID period out and when they introduced the stamp duty holiday, we're still doing much more volume now than we were doing at the start of 2020 and 2019. So it depends what you're going to use as a comparable, whether it's short term or long term. And I think so you've got so many people that are still in those sort of fixed term mortgages for the 3, the 5 years that probably not come out yet. And I think that's maybe where the worry is, how much, is that going to affect affordability? And like you say, will that push up repossessions? Who knows?
Yeah, the lockdown was definitely you can't call it a false indicator of the market because it happened.
Yeah.
But it wasn't normal for sure. So I must admit, I thought prices would drop quicker because what I didn't predict was the dramatic undersupply of sales.
Yeah.
I think you can make money in any market or any part of the cycle, Stuart. I think that you look for discounts when there's a crash in the market, and you look to add value when there's a more buoyant or growing market. And also, when residential might be good, commercial might not be so good, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely the most fascinating time in the market I've seen. And if you've got a gun to my head and you want me to predict, I think we're very close to the peak of this cycle. I really do. I don't know what you think, but
yeah, I feel exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same. Just maybe sort of slightly turning to a different sort of subject or area about housing. It's become really, really fashionable to buy houses and be an investor. And I don't know whether that's partly to yourself. A lot of people aspiring to be similar to yourself. We've seen lots of people that are new to the market come in and bought numerous properties. I've even been on a few sort of property courses where I would say, without naming any names, some people are maybe overly selling the good times about property. Maybe for the audience out there, we should talk about, actually, there are some negatives. One thing that I was really surprised about with some well-known property people is the complete lack of knowledge they were putting into the audience, that there are actually risks involved. And everything's great if you're maybe, you've got a tenant in situ and you're getting paid rent every month, then great. But of course, there are some downsides to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when someone is selling their course, they probably want to sell more the upsides than the downsides. Yeah. I made it a rule in all of my courses, because obviously I co-own Progressive Property, that we have a section on the downside risks, because I think it's really important. And just because there are risks and downsides doesn't mean it's not a good, viable investment. In fact, knowing the risk helps it become a more viable investment. So I think the risks to property are obviously if you overgear, over leverage, and you probably can't right now unless you go and borrow the deposit and circumvent the lender's rules, and then get a high loan to value mortgage, which is quite difficult to do now. They've sort of tightened up on that. Yeah. So you can overgear, you can get a fixed rate mortgage, but rates can go up quite significantly, as they have recently, and that's another risk. We fixed a 12-year mortgage at 2.7%, which is obviously very good, and that would have cost us £60,000 a month more had we got it in today's money. So, being careful of not exposing yourself to future interest rate rises. Also, if you just get into property and expect to be rich without understanding that you've got to vet the tenants, and you've got to build a good relationship with your project manager or your your refurb team, and you've got to manage the refurb team. A lot of people assume, for example, when they get a letting agent, that they don't have to manage the property because the letting agent will do that. But you still have to manage the letting agent.
Yeah, of course. And
so really, it's just about having good business common sense. The mistakes we've made in the past in property, Stuart, are if we've just let any old tenant. I know that there are bad landlords, but there are also bad tenants. And so, if we've been a bit desperate to get a tenant, that's been expensive. If we haven't done, because, with conveyancing, for example, when you bought enough properties, you sort of know what you're buying, and obviously you have to get conveyancing, but sometimes, you might not do the thorough diligence and research on the structure and things like that, so that can be an issue. And then maybe just on an individual level, if you want to travel the world and you want to have kind of like this more remote lifestyle, and then you've got mortgages and properties in 3 or 4 cities in the UK, that can cause an issue because you can be tied to those places when you might not want to be. A big mistake I see people make is they buy all over the place instead of just buying in one town or city, and they buy emotionally, because they think it will be a nice house to live in rather than it being a good investment.
Yeah, no, definitely. We see it all the time. Yeah. So just sort of having a bit of a chat regarding the actual conveyancing process. So what are your thoughts on the actual conveyancing? It's some might say an antiquated system. It's operated sort of differently in different countries. Have you got an opinion on the way we do things in England and Wales?
Yeah. And you're probably not going to like it.
No, go on. That's the whole point.
So in my money books, I wrote about a concept that money loves speed and money hates friction. And I think one of the most antiquated buying property is much slower than it should be. Why should it take 3 months or 6 weeks? I know it's not just the conveyancing process. I'm not, you asked here, I'm not overly being critical. But if you can transfer 100,000 or £1 million in the bank, in 2 hours, why does it take so long to buy a property? Why can you never get a hold of a solicitor in August? Because you can't. And so, I think I was quite excited when, the blockchain technology came in, and I thought maybe the process of buying a house could be sped up significantly. Even such things like having old paper deeds, it seems so out of date. That could be, a stored ledger, if you like, on the blockchain. So, but I don't. I think that is the conveyancing is an industry that could be disrupted. That could really dramatically increase the flow of money.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's 2 separate parts of the equation. There's the actual conveyancing, and then there's the things like title, land registry, which are almost 2 different sort of equations, if you like. So with
what are your thoughts? Why, you're the expert on this. Why does it take so long? And do you agree with me that it could be quicker?
100%. I mean, people talk about it all day long. There's lots of things that have been put to government. Whether they've got the appetite to change it, I don't know. But for me, there's just too many people involved. Too many third parties with, even though everybody thinks the same outcome is buying and selling the property. There's too many different agendas. You know, I think separate representation for banks is a must. I think it's a natural conflict if you're acting for the bank and the client. I think that should be different. You know, I think possibly moving stamp duty, a seller paying stamp duty would be a good idea. And of course, upfront information, you know, collating all the information right at the start of the process, like we do in an auction. All our auctions go through in 28 days. And I think, you know, that it should be similar in property. I think there is also an issue with our profession. I don't think we sell ourselves enough. I think we do a lot of due diligence. People are spending a lot of money, and that kind of often gets overlooked. We forget about that. And, you know, we're trying to protect, you know, people that are buying. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of a sit on the fence answer, but I think there's numerous things we could do to speed it up. But yeah, I think the biggest thing at the moment for me would be the land registry, speeding up the time it takes to actually get these registrations pushed through. You know, transfers of part taking 3 years to register is only clogging up the whole system for everybody. And it's those third parties that, for me, you know, need to be aligned. And like anything, you know, when they brought HIPs in years and years and years ago, there was hardly any consultation with lawyers. I think to speed up the process of conveyancing, you need to look at the moving process or the house buying process and consult every different sort of spoke of that wheel so that everyone moves forward with a common goal. And everybody you speak to wants it to go quicker, don't they? Simple as that. Isn't it? Nobody wants it to go, you know, go on forever. But they go. Not sure about the holidays in August, though, Rob.
Oh, come on. It's well known you can't get hold of a solicitor in August. Come on.
It's July and August, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, true.
So, yeah, maybe like lightening the mood a bit. Obviously, I see you on social media. I've listened to your podcast and your YouTube videos and bits like that. But what's the sort of thing that you like doing the most? Now, you know, it used to be public speaking, and didn't you hold a world record for public speaking?
Yeah. So I like the content creation side.
Yeah.
Because it's a direct way to help your audience, your community, and it's a much lower form of advertising than Google ads or Facebook ads. And it's rewarding, you know, when people give you good feedback that your content, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube video, really helped them. And I find that a more rewarding vocation than dealing with boilers and tenants and, you know, that kind of thing. So I would say that the content creation side is the side I personally enjoy the most, but I also enjoy the flow of money. And so, you know, I would be stupid to have walked away from continually buying property for the sake of, you know, enjoying social media, because, you know, property is a great asset class, and, you know, Mark and I have built up a portfolio of hundreds of units now. Yeah, I broke the world record for the longest public speech. And
how long was that?
It was 47 hours.
47 hours, crikey.
Yeah, and then and we raised a couple of $100,000. No, that one was 115 grand for charity, which is obviously a good feeling as well. But you know, the world has changed, Stuart, and this is something, you know, as you know, I own progressive property, and I'm always going into the community saying, look, accountants, lawyers, solicitors, conveyancers, you need to jump on social media. You're missing a trick. It seems to be those kind of professions are the worst.
Yeah.
At social media, like you said, you know, maybe because you have to be somewhat cautious, you're maybe not best at marketing and advertising yourself. And it sort of it's a bit against, you know, that natural profession. But you know, like most people don't even know what conveyancing is and how it works. And if they understood the process, that would help. Most people, as you know, when they buy a property, they don't know what ducks to have in a row. So that's something that they could be educated on, which will make your job easier. So I do think that, you know, I was one of the early disruptors in our space in the UK in leveraging social media, and I think it's an opportunity certainly in your type of industry.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with you. We've been as active as we possibly can be against all the platforms, but a lot of the largest UK law firms don't really have much of a presence.
No.
And given that it's time intensive, but it's a medium that's free,
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
why wouldn't you do it? Does seem a strange
Yeah.
one for me, you know, especially when I can remember the days when we used to sort of spend, you know, 5 figures a month on the Yellow Pages and those days. And this is such a more direct way to your client.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the Progressive Property Facebook community has 42,500 members, and you know, you can reach 42,500, of which maybe 25 to 30,000 might still be relatively active over the last year.
Yeah.
So you know, your ideal client market clusters together in groups, yet these people don't come to these places. Like, I bet there aren't many people in your space that do a podcast. I bet you're one of the few, for example.
Not many. Yeah, I think there's a couple of conveyancing bodies that might do one, but I can't think of many conveyancing firms individually that do them. We've just started our own one called the PCS Pod, and that's had great traction. What we like about it as well is that you can actually have, you know, a different target audience for different platforms. So we're targeting sort of first-time buyers and clients and trying to educate them on the system, whether it be about removals. You know, we've interviewed a surveyor, property sources, all that kind of stuff, educating people. And then we can have mediums like this where we can talk more professionally, where the audience are lawyers and other professionals. So it's such a diverse space.
Yeah.
But yeah. So with regards to sort of what you've got coming up next, I saw recently you did a charity boxing match with Samuel Leeds. So you really are the jack of all trades, got everything going on. So what's next for Rob Moore?
So yeah, I like variety, and you know, I think one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is that you can meet that need for variety without it damaging your career. In fact, it can be good for your career. So yeah, I had this charity boxing match with Samuel Leeds. We raised nearly £250,000 for charity, which I was really pleased with, and that just, you know, I like to do quite creative things for marketing my business. You know, I think that was a pretty creative thing. I've just finished writing my book, Money Matrix, so that comes out next year. I'm writing another book with a dear friend of mine, Ryan Pinnock, called Money Loves You, which will come out later this year. And then continuing to create content, pump out the podcast episodes. I'm at nearly episode 1,000 now, and the YouTube videos. We're still buying property, Stuart. You know, we just bought the Pizza Express building, and we've got some money in our pension to buy a couple of units. And then, you know, trying to expand the training business. We're not global, and we could be. And we're as close to 25 million in sales as we've ever been, and I want to try and hit that target this year, because I think that a company, we've been doing this, we've been in the training space since 2008. So, you know, really 15 years in now, I feel like, you know, we should be hitting those kind of numbers. So yeah, there are a few things that I've got going on.
Just a bit then.
Yeah, well, you're a long time dead. So.
Yeah. Well, look, Rob, just to I want to say thanks for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed the chat, and you know, I'd recommend to our audience, whether it be lawyers or anybody else, to visit your social media platforms. I particularly found the podcast really helpful, and some of the tips that you give on that medium we've sort of integrated here. So I think there's a lot of value out there, and bearing in mind it's free, you know, why wouldn't you go and take a listen? So look, I just want to say thanks for coming on today, Rob. Take care, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thanks, Stuart.
Take care. See ya.